back to the Doctor Who Marathon. I'm your host McEdam, and today we're going to be talking about the Time Lord Victorious animated series, Dalek, written by James Gross and is directed by Scott Hancock, Peter Curdock, and John Doyle. This was a 5-episode, 13 to 20 minute episode series on YouTube. They released like these small little videos like once a week during the Time Lord Victorious event, which tied into the larger narrative. More specifically, it was the first point in the timeline in which the Daleks appeared in the event. Now, a lot of people, when it comes to the canonicity of Doctor Who, might criticise me talking about this after The Night, the Fool and the Dead, because chronologically, even from any point of view, it takes place prior to that adventure, as it sees, because in the comic book tie-in, Defender of the Daleks, you had the 10th Doctor before the Waters of Mars interacting with these specific Daleks. And so, from the Doctor's point of view, that takes place before Waters of Mars. However, we didn't tackle Defenders of the Daleks because I didn't have time to pick it up, and also I just wasn't that too interested in it, to be honest. But the Daleks here do play a larger role in the larger narrative of the Time Lord Victorious event, as they do also tie in with the 8th Doctor audio dramas, in which they team up and they will later go on to star in the novel All Flesh is Grass, which we will be tackling. So this I treat this as a kind of prequel to that novel, and that's why I've put it after The Night, the Fool and the Dead. So that's why I've put it here. But that being said, this story has been heavily criticised. Sometimes just, sometimes not. One of the main issues is that the animation style, a lot of people didn't seem to like. Now, the animation is by a company called Studio Libdell. I don't know a thing about them, but I imagine they are a very low-budget company. But essentially, you just describe the graphics, the visual style here. It's essentially a PS2 GameCube graphics being pushed through a HD lens with HD lighting and that kind of graphics, but keeping that base GameCube, PlayStation 2, almost like early to mid 2000s graphical style, making the entire thing feel like a overindulged cutscene in terms of the graphics. Now, a lot of people might have a go at me for this, and if you are somebody who hates it, then I think completely fair enough, that's your opinion. However, though I didn't like it at the beginning with it, because of said problems, I think when you get used to the style, it's actually really engaging and really, actually really fits, especially how in this story there aren't any human characters. Most, if not all characters, are robots, if not heavily armoured characters who appear like in the background somewhere. So you don't need so clear animation here, in my opinion. And I've seen a lot of great fan edits where they reanimate it, and they look absolutely gorgeous, and I don't want to take anything away from them, but this was a project done with a time limit and was 5 episodes, 13 to 20 minutes long each episode. There's a lot of time to be spent, so they can't obviously push the graphics as well as a fan had on like a 2-second clip of the story, so you can kind of justify that. I also wish that we actually got more stuff like this. Have you ever seen like a game and you're like, with the cutscenes, this is awesome, I really wish we had like an animation in this style? Imagine that, but the original game, doesn't exist. It's essentially that. It's so cool. Although I will have to stress this out. I will have to point this out because just to the fact it's incredibly funny. When this was released, I was talking to this about with my mate. And he basically pointed out that the graphics reminded us a lot of the animation series, The Butt Ugly Martians, to which me and him, we have this kind of in-joke where we call this series The Butt Ugly Daleks. That is hilarious. And it does kind of fit because it has that really not aged well graphics when it comes to its visual style. But anyway, now in terms of plot, this story actually has surprisingly a lot going for it, with each episode basically having its own little plot. It all ties into a bigger narrative, the narrative of this creature, the entity as it's called, and of course that ties into the larger Time Lord Victorious. But each individual plots, something which I was not expecting. I was expecting something more like the classic series of Doctor Who, where like it just feels like a movie essentially, just been with carefully placed cliffhangers to keep the audiences on edge, sort of like so it's one continuous story. But that's not exactly accurate. To have a much more accurate comparison here, I would compare it to the Doctor Who animated story, The Infinity Quest, in which each episode does tie into the larger narrative, but each individual episode feels like its own thing. The difference is, unlike that story where the idea for the plot is very simple when it comes into the tie-in, the Doctor and his companion go to a place and pick up an item, the MacGuffin of that particular episode, which ties into the larger narrative, but then like it takes them to a pirate planet, it takes them to a snow planet. You get the gist. But here, each plot actually has its own different type of story as well into it, which makes this event really fascinating in my opinion. It might mean, however, that a lot of stuff is rushed and is not as well developed as I think it would like to have been. But before that, let's get into the characters, because this is one of the few stories in which Daleks are a main character. There is no Doctor. There isn't no human eyes to see through the story. Our main protagonists are Daleks. More specifically, the Daleks of the Restoration Empire. Now this all ties in again to Time Lord Victorious and other Doctor Who parts into the franchise. From what I can gather, the Restoration Empire is the new Dalek Empire after the Dalek Civil War that was previously seen in remembrance of the Daleks. In fact, these Daleks, according to the comic book Defenders of the Daleks, which this takes place before, these Daleks actually have no idea what the Time War is. From the Daleks' point of view, in this personal point in the timeline, the Time War hasn't happened yet. That's really interesting, isn't it? And technically these Daleks take place in a time during the 8th Doctor, when the 8th Doctor is running around. However, because of Time Lord shenanigans, multi-Doctor shenanigans, it also heavily ties into the 10th Doctor, which is why also I didn't tackle it during the 8th Doctor adventures. But that's beside the point. So anyway, onto the characters. We have the new Emperor, which actually takes the form of a classic Dalek Emperor from the Doctor Who Dalek comic book series from the 1960s and 70s, in which you have like a shorter body and then you've got this large dome as a head. And personally, I think it looks really goofy. But I do understand that it is a reference to a classic Terry Nation comic book strip. This is an idea that was originally brought out by a Terry Nation comic strip. I don't know if it's supposed to be the exact same Dalek, but I know that there's the reference tying into that. We have this exterminating executioner Dalek, should I say. This black Dalek who is very power hungry. I just realised I didn't talk about like the personality of the Emperor Dalek. He seems really mighty and he's full of himself. The Emperor Dalek now. The Emperor Dalek, he thinks he's in charge, and he thinks he's the greatest out of the Daleks. And when something basically knocks him off his heels, if something like he doesn't know what to do, he kind of freezes up, and he kind of like does have moments where he has no idea what to do, and all of these Daleks are coming to him for orders to ask, what should we do? How should we continue? And he does kind of freeze, and he kind of hesitates, which makes him a really fascinating Dalek, that he would do that, and he has to kind of rely on other Daleks to make him look superior. So that's kind of really interesting. Now back to this Black Executioner Dalek. This is a Dalek which is specialised in killing, which then begs the question, like, what else are the Daleks? I mean, Daleks are all supposed to be like mercenary killing robots. Well, they're not robots, they're mutants in a thing, yes, I know. But I just find it really strange how this is a concept. But it gets some really great voice acting from Nicholas Briggs. I like how manic and how trigger happy this particular Dalek sounds. It also has a really cool gun. Instead of sucker, it has this another gun which can actually shoot like a massive laser from a far distance. Sadly, however, we don't see a lot of this Dalek. Maybe we see him in the comic books or in the Eighth Doctor audio dramas, or maybe even the main events novel. But in terms of this, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more out of the weaponize of him. And then we get, in my personal opinion, the heart of this. The reason why I think people should watch it. The Dalek Prime Strategist. Now, the Dalek Prime Strategist is very interesting because he's not in a usual Dalek casing in this time. Most of these Daleks have a design which is based off the 2005 bronze design, however, with a different colour palette. Also, I would like to state as well, the colour grading on this is really confusing because it makes the Daleks appear different colours. Sometimes they appear as their usual bronze self because the lighting is just so yellow. But the actual colours of the Daleks here are supposed to be silver. I'm not too sure if the ball things on their skirts are supposed to be blue. However, I have seen in other mediums, like on the covers for the Big Finish audio dramas and the comic book, that these particular Daleks are supposed to have blue balls on their casing, on their skirts. So I couldn't notice that here. They could have just been like all silver, like how the bronze Daleks are all bronze. I don't know about that, but anyway, with the exception of this Prime Strategist Dalek, who appears in a 60s Dalek casing, the old-fashioned one, and not only that, it's like rusting, it's seemingly damaged, there's bits where it's like, you can clearly see it's been patched up, and it also has this very unique voice where it seems to be quiet, seems to be a lot more timid than your usual Dalek. And I feel like if you're not going to watch this story for anything else, you watch it for the Prime Strategist, because he's such a fascinating Dalek. He's a Dalek who doesn't rely on defensive or attackive strategies. He relies on his wit. And the majority of the story is basically just him outmaneuvering his villains. And there's this whole dynamic as well, which I think gets played a lot in other stories, where the Prime Strategist, which I'm just going to call Strategist from now on, where the Strategist and the Emperor has this kind of uneasy alliance about them, where you can kind of get this feeling that the Strategist has been very underappreciated. There's scenes in which the Dalek Emperor has no idea what to do, and the Strategist kind of barks him orders, and the Dalek Emperor's like, yes, do it now, do the orders. But then as soon as he gets the chance, like when there's like no other option, and so the strategist is basically forced to fail, like what happens in episode 2, in which we'll get onto that when we get onto that. It's just such an interesting dynamic, because it's like as soon as he fails, as soon as there's even an opportunity for the Emperor Dalek to basically say, you fail, you suck, the Emperor Dalek takes no waste of time on just telling her, the strategist, how much he fucking hates him. Oh, and I don't know, I would really like to see more of the Dalek side of the Time Lord victorious, if the strategist, which I know he's in a majority of these stories, appears in, because he seems like a really fascinating singular Dalek. There's stuff I've heard from, I believe it's the comic books, where it stated that he's actually older than the Empress himself. He could actually be one of the prime Daleks from Genesis of the Daleks, who has basically, so he's like a really, really old Dalek, a very wise old Dalek, and that's why he's so witty and clever. But I don't know, I just think this particular Dalek is very interesting. But like I said, this story is mainly focused on its plot, which in one sense is either its greatest strength or its greatest weakness. Because episode 1 basically sees the Daleks basically just going down on this planet, just invading it, just shooting lasers at it, and trying to get their hands on the archive of Islos. And originally the Emperor's just like shooting lasers at it, but the strategist comes along and is just like, cease your fire. We should aim your weapon specifically at these bunkers, and communicate with these robots to basically protect the archives, and try and plead with them, try to make a bargain with them, because these robots are basically determined to look after the archives. That's what they're programmed for. That's what the AI is made to do. However, they also have a duty of care for the people that inhabited this planet, the people of Islos. And so the Dalek prime strategist can see this, and he gets the Emperor to basically manipulate them into giving them the archive. However, when they arrive, the archive is empty, and the cliffhanger for part 1 has them being chased by this entity, this green particle effect, which kind of looks kind of cheap, I will admit. But again, for this kind of graphic, for this kind of style of animation, I think it looks really cool. There's this kind of like voidless entity, which basically chases them through, and is basically the main villain of the majority of the story, which we'll get onto later on in the adventure. With episode 2, they go to Skaro, but the entity has destroyed basically all Daleks on the higher up of the planet city, leaving only a handful of Daleks revived, non-dormant Daleks, and basically they're in a very tricky situation. Now, a lot of people have criticised this story for the end of the cliffhanger not really tying into the second episode, as in the first episode, at the end of the cliffhanger, the entity is literally seconds away from the Daleks as they're in the archive, in the archive of Islos. However, in the next episode, all the Daleks from Islos are in their Dalek ship, being chased by the entity in their saucers. So, what happened in between those? How did the Daleks get in time to go to their saucers? It doesn't kind of make a lot of sense. I do understand that, but it's one of those things I think you just got to live with, personally. I don't think it's too much of an issue. We also have a kind of tie-in to the story Planet of the Daleks, where we basically learn that Daleks basically store dormant Daleks inside planets, where they just have thousands upon thousands of Daleks. And the strategist is sent to interact with the Sentinel of the Fifth Galaxy. And I love how when you hear that title, you think, "Oh, this is going to be some really epic, cool." I don't know. The Daleks meet this like strange entity or something, but it turns out to just be this like whiny little robot that the Daleks have created to basically be like a managing computer system to protect these vaults, and that's it. I mean, they can't. I mean, they're allowed to use the title Sentinel of the Fifth Galaxy to do that. It's just really strange because that name puts images in your mind that there's going to be some really cool giant robot creature or something, but no, it's just this small little thing which keeps calling the strategist Emperor, and the strategist is like, "You are defective," but we'll sort that later. But for now, I need an army to stop this creature. Whatever you say, Emperor. And they go down to this bunker and they revive these really cool Daleks designs where they have they basically got these red casings with black balls on their skirts. So it has this really cool. I personally consider these Daleks the pre-Time War. These are the Daleks designs just before the Time War was truly achieved. At least that's how I see it. So I'd like to have seen a 8th Doctor adventure where he tackles these red Daleks. But these red Daleks aren't working for the main Dalek, as they start screaming out to the strategist, "We obey you, Emperor." And the strategist kind of clicks that these aren't Daleks that work for them anymore. They have been poisoned, possessed by the mind of the entity. And we later learn that the entity is working for another creature. It basically is a henchman for a much bigger entity, and the bigger entity wants the Daleks not to be stopped per se, but needs to be controlled so that it has no threat to the entity or its higher ups in the future. And so it sees a timeline in which, because it's a time sensitive being, where the strategist is the Emperor and basically can manipulate and believes that the strategist Dalek would be a better fit for Emperor than the actual Emperor itself. Now, this also again ties into the larger narrative of Time Lord Victorious, something to the comic books which I cannot talk about really, because I haven't read those stories. But apparently this entity works for a creature known as the Hond, this oozy creature which is apparently the sentient of suffering come to life, which sounds pretty cool and pretty interesting. However, I've heard that it doesn't feel quite right. It feels like it should be the other way round, with this entity feeling much more like a sentient creature and that one feeling more like a monster, but that's beside the point. My biggest question is, why would a creature that thrives on suffering want to weaken the Daleks? If anything, the Daleks should be their main source of power and want the Daleks to become more violent, to become more aggressive. And then it clicked. The Emperor Dalek has no idea essentially what he's doing and basically relies on this strategist Dalek. If he gets the strategist Dalek to become Emperor, he basically cut out the middleman and leaves the Daleks with a much more dangerous Emperor on the throne. How cool is that? I took a criticism and turned it into a positive. And what's really cool is that it actually shows how loyal the strategist is actually to the Emperor, because despite him being kind of seemingly persuaded by this, he actually tricks the entity with setting the self-destruct system much shorter than the entity predicted, and so destroying the majority of the dormant Daleks and the Sentinel of the Fifth Galaxy, allowing the strategist Dalek to escape. The Emperor Dalek is just like, "You have failed. You should have revived them in a way where the entity shouldn't have been revived. you are the one to blame for this. It's like, what the hell is he supposed to do? I get the idea of this story. And then they go to, and then in another episode, which is basically the last 3 episodes, all deal with the Daleks' relationship with the mechanoids. Yes, the mechanoids actually make an appearance in the story. For those of you who don't know, the mechanoids were the creatures created by Terry Nation back in the 60s during the Dalek adventure, The Chase. And they were essentially built up to be not only this kind of rival to the Daleks, but also as a sort of replacement if something to replicate the popularity of the Daleks, these giant ball-like things. It never came to be, sadly. There were rumours that the 3rd Peter Cushing movie was going to be about them, but however that didn't happen. And the last 3 episodes mainly deal with them, and that's where the plot kind of slows down. And I feel like the character stuff with the Prime Strategist is a lot more interesting. And we do kind of see how smart these Daleks are, as they basically team up with, they basically go straight to Mechanaut, the home planet of the Mechanoids, and they basically discuss like, how are we going to deal with this entity, what will happen with all of you lot. Your might is second only to the Daleks, so you could have like a different strategy which could stop the entity from chasing the Daleks. And the Mechanoid is like, why should we get involved? Why should we even care? Why would you, one of our greatest enemies, why would we ally to you? And then they're like, oh wait, yeah, because we brought the entity to your bloody planet and we're basically forcing you to deal with our problem at hand. And this also allows Daleks to access the mainframe, the ideal situation for to create these Daleks and mechanoids to work on their shields, stopping the entity for all. By the end of this, there's only 2 Daleks alive. There's only 2 Daleks left in the entire galaxy. 2 sentient Daleks, the Emperor and the Prime Strategist. And there's a bit where the Dalek Emperor goes to fight the entity and starts firing away, and he basically says he's the last Dalek, completely ignoring the Prime Strategist. Now, let's talk about the mechanoids a bit, because there's 2 interesting ones. Most of them are these dull robots we've seen in The Chase, where they're just like, stop, don't move, stop, and they talk like really robotic. But there's 2 actually more intelligent mechanoids. We have the scientist mechanoid, which teams up with the Prime Strategist to come up with a plan to defeat the entity that works for the Hond. But you also have the Queen mechanoid, who talks to the Empress, and they have this kind of debate about beauty and how, and they can basically compare empires, which I find really fascinating and actually brings out the best in the Emperor Dalek, in my opinion. But what's interesting to me about the Queen Mechanoid is that she's voiced by Andrea Mahindra, Rani from the Sarah Jane Adventures, the Chirac from Nikola Tesla's Night of Terror. She's been getting a lot of Doctor Who work recently, and I love every moment of it. This is just so cool. She's such a fantastic performance, and I knew when they announced that she was going to be in this, I was like, oh, that's really cool. I did not recognise her voice. I had to look this up to find out which character she was playing. That it's so unrecognisable. It's amazing. She does a fantastic job here. I was saying, she has got a lot to work with. She basically just has these debates with the Emperor Dalek, which mainly focuses more on him than it does on her. But in terms of just like hiding her voice and just making her sound real to a mechanoid, she does a fantastic job here, and it really took me by surprise. And they'd actually defeat the entity by episode 4, leaving the 5th one to basically the mechanoids. They're like, right, Daleks, you had tricked us, you had betrayed us, you used your intelligence against us, so that we can basically two Dalek enemies at once. But now there's only two of you. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to let you go back to your home planet. We're going to let you enjoy a bit of your peace for a second. And then we're going to come. We're going to come and finish the Dalek Empire for good. There will be no more Daleks after today. So go back to Skaro, enjoy the peace whilst you can, and then we're coming for you. With episode 5 basically being this war where the mechanoids are like coming to the Dalek Empire, and they're like, right, there's only two of you left. And they're like, are you sure you haven't miscounted? As a bunch of Daleks come out, and we basically learn that despite the Daleks in the city, the ones that were revived, the ones that are out there, they were the ones that were killed. There are thousands upon thousands of Daleks dormant underneath the planet. They have a mass bunker, which actually again ties into the idea in Planet of the Spiders, as Planet of the Daleks, sorry, in which Daleks do get stored in these cold environments underneath planets. So that kind of does tie in heavily to the story. And the mechanoids actually team up with the Dalek strategists, and they basically they try and bargain with them, realizing that like they can kind of see that there's this rocky relationship, and for the moment they start believing that the strategist is actually willing to portray his emperor. And there's a scene in which the highest of the mechanoids get the strategist to a specific location, and the emperor is just like, you have betrayed the Daleks, kill without question, kill him. So then all the Daleks are after him as well, and the strategist takes the mechanoid scientist into a room in which Daleks have basically abandoned this technology they once used, because with their technology of static electricity could only take them so far, in which they basically plan to open this kind of like wormhole device which can actually target someone and suck them through a wormhole. However, because of their technology at the time, they couldn't actually achieve it. But the mechanoids are like, you know what? We are actually experts at this. We know about this technology. Give it to us for a bit. We will fix it for you, and we will put a black hole right on top of the Emperor and suck him through it. And it's like, good. Now do without question. Open a black hole in top of all the battlefield and get ready to suck the Emperor. And just before the mechanoid is about to suck the Emperor, the strategist is like, wait, I have a better idea. Let me take the controls off you for a second. And he takes the control and then just sucks all the mechanoids into the dimension of the entity, getting rid of two problems completely. And that is just so genius, and it just shows how threatening and intelligent this Dalek is, and he's really smart. But like I said, the problem with this story is that it goes really, really quick, with only such little time to develop these storylines. It does kind of feel like the Daleks are kind of like on cheat mode, because it seems like at the end of the story they just seem to have all the answers, which does kind of feel dull by the end of part 5. But we do leave on a cliffhanger for Defenders of the Daleks, where one of the mechanoids, a destroyed mechanoid with a split of the entity inside, basically announces that our higher up, our leader, our creator, whatever, is coming after you, Daleks, so you better be ready. And the Emperor basically asks the Prime Strategist for an idea, to which it does. And we learn in the comic book that is to get the 10th Doctor involved and to make an alliance with him. So the Strategist's main weapon to defense is teaming up with their enemies, teaming up with a weaker enemy to have two enemies of the Daleks basically fight each other. That's his thing, and that's his main weapon of choice, shall we say. So that is Dalek the Time Lord Victorious tie-in. overall, it does have a lot of issues. It does have very limited style animation, which I personally actually has its own charm and would love to see more stories like this personally. But the story does move really quick, which means it's not boring per se, but does mean that we don't connect to any of these characters as much as we would, and does kind of feel like out of nowhere sometimes the Daleks kind of have all the answers, but it does leave this really interesting dynamic between the strategist and the Emperor. But the fun of the story, the main meat of the story, is mainly specifically down to that one Dalek, the strategist, because he's just so fun, and every time he's on screen, and that particular voice that Nicholas Briggs gives him, and the way he's written, this smart, obscure Dalek, that kind of feels really engaging, and I'd love to see more of the strategist. With the Emperor being kind of dull without that connection to the strategist, and though it is like kind of cool to see a Dalek that's like, you know, does question itself and does kind of freeze up and it's like, I have no idea what I'm doing, and kind of like pushes forward like these other Daleks to do it for him and then shout at them when they fail. It's really interesting and fun, but when you have it with the strategist, it's no comparison in terms of who's more enjoyable. And so I did kind of wish it was just the strategist on his own in certain bits, where I wish that the story was not that the Emperor Dalek was out of it completely, but the story was more focused on the strategist, letting it be his story. It does kind of tease that in certain scenes, but it never gets that deep into the character. So, is this a success? Is this a failure? I think it's kind of meh. I might like it more than I dislike it, but it's not anything that's going to blow your brain out anytime soon. So anyway, that is the Dalek Time Lord Victorious tie-in. So, join me next time where the Doctors, the 8th and 9th incarnation, has to go to war with an incarnation that has basically gone mad and has defeated the concept of death itself. The Time Lord Victorious. So join me next time for the finale, to us anyway, of the Time Lord Victorious event. And I'll see you next time for All Flesh is Grass. And I'll see you next time on the Doctor Who Marathon. Ta-da!